thanks everyone for coming today. This is day one of PlanTech Week. And for those of you that don't know, most of you should, PlanTech Week is this week-long exploration that Future Cities Catapult are doing to explore how technology can help us plan cities better. And today we're going to be discussing the potential impact of how technology can impact how citizens are involved in decision-making and plan-making. Do feel free to tweet #PlanTech if you want to keep the conversation going afterwards. And we'll also be live streaming this. So be aware. I think so. We'll kick off today. We've got 5 speakers. They're each going to do a quick 8-minute presentation, and then we'll have 20 minutes of Q&A after that. So if you save your questions towards the end. And we'll kick off with Daisy Froud, who was a founder of AOC Architecture and is now a teacher at the Bartlett.
Great. Thank you for that. Okay. Hello. So these are the questions we've been asked to look at today. And particularly this top one, what are the tweaks and transformations that could occur in the short and medium term to enable citizens not only become more engaged in the planning system, but actively co-design their neighbourhoods? And for me, potentially for either of these things to occur, particularly this latter one, it's not tweaks, it's transformation that's required. As for the latter to happen in a truly equitable way, this is about transferring decision-making power and rejigging decision-making structures, and that's no short order. Now, I'm not in any way a digital technologist. I work full-time designing tools and processes that allow people to take decisions about the built environment. It often gets summed up as community engagement. I use a lot of tools and processes, but often these are very paper-based to support scenario-type work or deliberative decision-making. And I've been doing that for getting on for about 2 decades now, so basically most of my working life. I do this work for political reasons. So I hate the strand of community engagement that understands itself as PR or comms. Community engagement in the production of the built environment is politics. Who gets what, when, how, to quote this famous political scientist. Do I need this? Yeah. It's really weird and echoey where I'm standing. I don't know if it is for you. Okay, hold it here. Okay, I dance around a lot when I'm talking, so it makes it hard to hold it in the same place. And the planning system, obviously, this is pretty much a good definition for that as well. So that really informs my approach to those questions. What are the issues on the ground? The frustrations or the ideas that the groups of citizens I work with have shared with me over the past 17 years and are sharing with me now? And what kinds of tools or technologies can help with dealing with these? So in order to answer that question intelligently, I need to give a little bit of context about how I understand this. And there's 2 things. One is that from where I'm standing, every tool or process is a technology. A piece of paper is a technology. A really good agenda for a meeting is a technology. And I do get a little frustrated sometimes when I meet people who are bamboozled by new digital technology who laugh at that idea and try and impose certain tools. They want me to use innovative tools rather than combining those with ones I already have. And this has been a real influence, made me think, okay, yep, there are academics who say this too. So this historian, David Edgerton, wrote this very influential book, The Shock of the Old. And he said the problem is, with history, we get obsessed with the history of innovation of technology, whereas we should be looking at technology in use. And here's all kinds of wonderful facts, such as actually more horses were being used to wage World War II than at any other point in history, and yet we think of the horse as being a 19th century technology, and World War II is all about atom bombs. The second bit of context is I would find all in all the biggest barrier to engagement in built environment decision making is lack of trust. And I encounter it all the time, both between lack of trust from the political and technocratic establishment of citizens and lack of trust of citizens in the establishment. And this is the thing that is in the way of good decision making at the moment. And the problem is, of course, that all our hands are bound in London by this well-documented phenomenon, that actually what's really been driving the development of London in recent decades has been a focus on land and property as assets and the benefits that we can theoretically accrue as a society from those increasing in value. And more people on the ground who I work with in neighbourhoods feel, well, this isn't how we want our city to be shaped. And they feel it's the politicians who are not listening to them, whereas, of course, the politicians' hands are often equally bound because these things are bigger than local policy, they're bigger than regional policy, and they're bigger than national policy. This doesn't have to be this way. This is an incredible document that was produced in 2006 by the Joseph Rowntree Trust, and it basically looks at the state of power in Britain and says, over the 20th century, citizens have become more and more informed, intelligent, wanting to participate, but it's the systems and the structures that don't help with that. Those are the things we need to change. And they've been empowered again by information and communication technologies, starting with the printing press, the radio, the telegraph. All these things have allowed information to be shared, and now we're just on the latest wave. So these are the main barriers to engagement that I encounter. Seeing the point to engaging at all, for reasons just discussed. Having time to participate to a certain degree, although I think people do participate when they can see there's a value in doing it. Having the knowledge to enable them to participate, so people come along and they're frustrated because they can't get their hands on the information to offer an intelligent opinion, and they know that and they ask the questions, but the local authority never has the information to hand. Understanding how things are shaped, and being able to shape them at the point in the process that matters. So by the time you're consulting on a project, actually the intelligent citizens in an area are asking very good questions about how that project even got to happen in the first place, because they knew so little about the opportunity to shape the policy that has made that development possible. And that puts them then in a NIMBY position, whereas actually at heart I don't feel they're NIMBYs at all. And then lack of trust in the establishment and the people. And then fundamentally, also, I still meet a lot of people who neither have the technology or the knowledge about how to use it properly. So quite often when I experiment with a new digital technique, I end up working with the same people I would have been working with anyway, just over multiple strands. And it's the same people that I'm not reaching, because what they need is some proper directed relationship building, to use a bit of jargon, some trust to be built. So digital technologies I've tended to find useful and would like more of are tools that consolidate, condense, or map existing information, tools that collect existing data and share it, and tools that allow communication about admin and practicalities, because these allow me and the groups I work with to get together more easily and to have the information we require to be intelligent citizens at our fingertips and take good decisions. So actually Harrow, I know Neeraj is a Harrow councillor, Harrow's actual website everyone moans about. It's like multiple layers without any information. But this is something that they've done recently, which I think is great, where they've started to map all the developments, public sector and private sector, that are happening in Harrow, because one of the biggest barriers to good participation is people saying, I want to understand how this all joins up together. I want to see the council is thinking strategically about it. And that's not an easy thing to produce, whereas this map is now an incredibly useful tool for us. I find these less useful or actively unhelpful. Tools that aim to support collaborative discussion, debate, or opinion sharing online. I find that, and we all know the way that people can often speak or confuse each other online. And tools for anything other than the most rudimentary, i.e., a vote, decision making. I really believe those things have to happen face to face, because that's where I see the difference, the trust being built, the people understanding the other. The fundamental thing, the final point I want to end on, is architectural historians discuss the difference between the urbs and the polis. The polis is the city of politics, the form of the city, like old Barcelona here, that's evolved in response to human needs to interact and to exist in society together. The urbs is a creation of capitalism and the late 19th century, when there's a need for the city to evolve efficiently in order to keep the city functioning. So it's a technocratic tool. We need more focus on the polis and less On the urbs, the problem is London is far too much of an urbs at the moment, which is incredibly disempowering in terms of any form of genuine democratic behaviour. So I would ask the technologists, how can digital technology enhance and support the polis rather than the status quo? I found this really interesting during the last election, the My Nearest Marginal, that you could see how that decision-making process was working and quickly gain access to somewhere that you could go and make the most difference. And I'd like to know what's the equivalent of that for planning decision-making that reveals what's going on rather than hiding it. This is one of my favourite quotes I use with architects, but you could pretty much swap it for any form of creative activity. So digital technology and digital technologists can and do potentially produce positive effects when their liberating intentions coincide with the real practice of people in the exercise of their freedom. But if you don't bear these politics in mind, what I do see with lots of the rhetoric around smart cities and more efficient use of data and being able to hand decision-making over to algorithms, to me feels potentially dangerous and a real step back from the democratic production of the city. Whew.
That was very thought-provoking. Thank you, Daisy. And straight on to Angela Koch, who will introduce herself. Angela has set up Imagine Places and has been working with communities for about 15 years plus.
20 almost, yeah, thank you. Good afternoon. I'll try to keep up the pace. This is a bit of a challenge. So my name is Angela Koch. I run a very small organization called Imagine Places, specializing in engaging communities and landowners and all the other stakeholders in collaborative planning and design. And I will tell you a little bit about, I guess, innovation in the planning system, which it's fair to say it's called neighborhood planning. I am a neighborhood planner. And I do work with all of those that are involved in neighborhoods, and that is the neighborhood planning groups, councils. Locality is a big organization who is helping those groups. I work with architects, planners, Design Southeast, Princess Foundation, Royal Planning Institute, UCL and Politecnico di Milano, and I understand my professor is here today, Carletta Fontana, which is fantastic. And I'm also a Kentish towner. So that accent is obviously from German, but I'm a Kentish towner. My ambition is really to enable people from all walks of life to get involved, to collaborate, and decide together when the look, feel, and prosperity of streets, neighborhoods, and the cities and regions are ready for change. And that is quite an ambition with having all these different stakeholders working together. Because we all know different things. We all start thinking about, and we have a different idea about what a good place might look or feel like. But I think working with many people, instead of 5 or 6, let's talk 400 or 500, and trying to design with them together places, gives you far more knowledge. It inspires you, but it also challenges your values. What you thought before is right or wrong. And because it's very complex, this sort of thing-built environment, sometimes we don't even have the answers, but it will allow us to phrase our questions better through the challenges we get from the different brains in a room or on the street when we talk to them. And overall, there is that hope that we produce, through working together, better places. And probably a little bit sort of aligned with what Daisy said, and I don't know if you can read this on the top. The core of all good processes are the great conversations that are taking place. It's the conversation which is the greatest tool we have for change and innovation. And that is an online conversation, that is certainly a face-to-face conversation. And both of these, the digital world and the analog world, need to come together to get the best outcome, I think. And we're searching, what I'm pretty sure at this stage, that we need to visualize these conversations. These are the real ones in the real world, and these are the ones in the digital world, and do that on a big scale. Why is it important to visualize? Because we do have to learn a lot about good placemaking, and that is true for every single stakeholder involved. That's neighborhood planning for you. Can I just ask who in the room has sort of a understanding what neighborhood planning is, the thing that they introduced in 2011? Oh, fantastic. That's great news. This is a slide. This is very condensed. I love it for that reason. It's a quick reminder of what neighborhood planning is. It's power for communities to make planning policies and grant planning permission. It's a responsibility to meet the need and support of growth, and it's also investment in your local community. So it's trying to do all of these things that probably didn't go that well in the past, where we had a lot of educated, in-the-know people making decisions, and a lot of people who are educated and in a different kind of know in the local area weren't involved or didn't have the right to be involved. And neighborhood planning, to be sure, this is not just about engagement, it's actually about decision making, because neighborhood plan is made by the community, with help, but it's made by the community, and they're not paid, they're all volunteers. Sorry, I could talk about this actually for hours. So about in 2011, I had this sort of attempt, and you don't need to read all of this, how neighborhood planning could work. 4 minutes, fabulous. The big thing about the digital aspect of this is that not everybody wants to be involved all the time and come to meetings. These are the big clouds where the trust gets built and consensus can be achieved. You have the little clouds, which is sort of e-engagement, digital engagement, to keep the conversation going, to check if the stuff you delivered and produced at the key big meetings, are they getting support from the wider community? So there's sort of checking mechanism. And at the end, in neighborhood planning, you have a referendum. You actually have thousands of people have the right to decide, say yes or no. And I know referendum is a bit of a sort of dirty term these days, but you do have a task to build this. You know, at the beginning, you have a handful of people who are very enthusiastic and want to get on and trying to learn and get a head around it. At the end, you need to have thousands of people, and in London we have 100 groups working like this, and we had those who've been through the process, engaged over 1,000 people who got up on a Thursday and went to their polling station and went and voted. So anyway, we thought about engagement, and I have a bit of experience with working with the tools we have, and I have, maybe you can do this later, some ideas how we could improve them. Whatever you're going to go out, learn from me, analog or digital engagement, without a good and relevant question, a good dialogue and a chance for better answers is really hard to come by. The question is at the center of all of that. I like building models. And how can you design a street with the planning standards we have that is not car dominated and you know already you can't afford to build a multi-story car park or underground. And that's a community working who get a brief and said, how can we design this? And they actually designed this to scale. If somebody could build me a nice, cheap model digitally to do that the same, fabulous. I'll have it anytime. But we also do a lot just being out and about, because people do not often have the time or the interest to actually come to these planning design meetings. You go to the shops and ask a good question, which is often very simple. You get people together so they share and build trust and see what the others are doing, so you can start building consensus. So this emerges often out of this. You're on the street, you ask the people who actually look after the built environment what they kind of think and say. Or you're out and about, asking the younger people who are just passes by. You do, all of this. You see, there's hands, people, you can always hear people talking to each other, I hope. And that is what, to me, is immersive co-design in the old-fashioned way. But it's also, these are not the architect's drawing. We have architects there helping, but these are 1 minute, fabulous. Okay. And then also, I want to make that point, Dom. We also have people who are probably a bit bored of digital engagement already. This is the other generation. It's amazing when you see them, when you give them a bit of crafts material and a good question, let them get on with it. So I'd like to have that also sort of covered. This is in St. Albans. They're building models. They're learning. This is learning on the job with landowners, the architects, normal local, the resident from down the street, all learning. They're building models to scale. We know how much quantum is in there. We talk about viability. They're building this, then they get drawn up this. I don't know if you can see this. This is the same model. This is all within a week. Little models, you help them to visualize their vision and check if it's okay. Okay, so I gave you a little bit of insight on how we work. I thought I'm going to think about neighborhood planning in 2037 a little bit. And I think it will be called then neighborhood design. Planning for 15 years ahead was abolished in 2023. Sort of the whole local plan making is all gone because it doesn't really adapt quick enough to the real world we're having out there. And there's a public design app for your neighborhood that allows elected members and officers and landowners to check your level of support for a proposal or a design. It lets you design easily alternative designs in 3D and real-time provision of cost and impacts. This is not the very naive, Lego building. Well, Lego is a good start maybe, but it's actually telling you instantly how much money you can make of this, how much square meterage, what positive impacts on jobs, all the stuff we do analog as a professional team. You give people these tools to learn about it and get on with it. You can actually exhibit in that app your ideas and your work, maybe even get some thumbs up and some support, maybe even a campaign. Provides lots of great visualizations and narratives about your hood and your city and its people. So this is information sharing. Invites you to so you get an invitation when big meetings, the clouds, happening, and allows you to vote digitally. So I mentioned the referendum earlier. And elections, we should get better at this, being able to vote at the end of a process, not at the beginning, at the end when we learned about the benefits and disbenefits of a particular proposal. And again, don't forget, whatever I said, without the good question, you will not get better answers, basically. That was me, roughly. Thank you very much.
Good stuff. Thank you very much, Angela. And now more neighbourhood planning. David, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, so my name's David. I work at HACT, which is primarily a housing association research institute. But we did some work as part of the Future of Planning open call to think about the planning system. And that's what I want to take you through partially today. So I thought I'd start off by trying to think of what digital means to us right now. And I think the best way of summarizing would be as convenience. So the real transformation for me is that I can order an Uber, I can order some food to my house, I can go on to gov.uk and register to vote really easily. Digital is making things that were complicated and hard really, really, really simple. And I think that's a really positive thing, although it is perhaps making a bit lazier over time. The downside is that it perhaps makes people more individualized in how they interact with the world because everything is served up to an individual smartphone. And if you can think about how that then might translate into the planning system, I have a bit of a nightmare, which is that this guy returns home from work and he gets a push notification to his smartphone because he's inside a geofence which he has set around his home that says your neighbor is looking to sell off part of his garden and build some homes there. And that man can then click on the push notification, go through to an app or a website, and then there's a green tick or a red thumbs down, and then he presses the red thumbs down, maybe mashes it a few times, and then the app is so smart that it finds all of the relevant planning guidance that might allow him to object to that development in his neighbour's garden. He can then pick the one that he thinks best suits his preferences or what he thinks might be successful, and a letter automatically gets sent to the planning department or a comment is left on some sort of planning portal. This is a real nightmare scenario for me. It's incredibly convenient. It's using digital technology to help citizens be involved in the planning process, but it doesn't feel like a very good outcome for anyone, given the housing crisis that we have at the moment. So for me, yes, digital technology is very convenient, but if we want it to really empower and enable planning, we have to think about digital technology that actually allows us to look at citizens that we might not know or understand and try and work out their point of view. And I'm not sure there's that much tech these days that does that. I tried to have a look for some. I posed the question to some friends, what's some technology that actually challenges your beliefs? And we came up pretty empty-handed. One suggestion was to go on the Daily Mail comment section, if you have the opposing political view. But this is a bit more kind of serious as an approach. So someone built a fantastic Facebook add-on or Chrome extension called Escape Your Bubble. And what this tool does is finds an article about a political point of view that you've already said that you don't understand, it seems completely alien to you, and it will then place an article into your timeline, clearly marked, but fairly frequent, so that you start to break out of your echo chamber and start to think about how other citizens view your country. Now, I mean, this is a little bit different to planning. This is fairly broad. This is about politics in general, but I think this could translate into a planning context really nicely. So, you know, you get a push notification which says there's a development going on next door, and there's a little kind of thing from your neighbour saying, I really need to sell this land off because I think that society needs more homes, and also the money would be really good because there's a big cost that's coming up in my life, and that's really important for me right now. So our contribution to this sphere of kind of digital technology that helps you to understand how other citizens experience the world and the preferences that they might have is to build this tool called Neighbourhood Insight. And the fundamental technology that sits behind Neighbourhood Insight has actually been with us for a huge amount of time. It's statistics. So when governments realized that they couldn't form a complete consensus across the country and always represent people all the time through a conversation, they came up with the idea of just collecting statistics on people and using those to inform public policy. Statistics have been used in all sorts of different ways, but one of the fantastic things we have in the UK is the principle of open data, and we have a really strong open data movement, which means that we as citizens get to view those statistics. The difficulty is that without digital technology, actually going to all of those different Office for National Statistics websites, finding that statistic that's relevant to your area, and then pulling it together can be quite complicated. Particularly if all you want to do as a neighbourhood plan group is set preferences, have a discussion, build consensus, you probably don't want to be scraping websites for statistics. So our tool helps you to do that. It has a GIS function which allows you to map a handful of indicators that we think are relevant to neighbourhood planning. The website is now live. I'm a bit hesitant to say this because I feel like our service may explode if you all go on at the same time. But if you go to neighbourhoodinsight.org, then you should be able to have a look at the site. You'll get a pop-up. The pop-up is a bit slow, so you can click the X and just click on some data and have a look at the GIS function at least. But there is one challenge when you build a tool like this, which is that suddenly you create this shiny digital technology, but you've still fundamentally got an analog process, which is start to finish how you do your plan. So what we need to do in the short term is integrate with that analog planning process. And the way we've done that is by creating a Word document report about your area. It's about 50 pages long. It contains all the statistics that we think should be relevant to your area. And because it's in Word, you can copy and paste these different charts and statistics out into a wider plan document really easily. So this is a great short-term fix, and you can buy a report now for just £500 plus VAT. But in the medium term, what we'd really like to do is start to build an ecosystem of digital tools so that the start-to-finish plan process is completely digital but seamless for the citizen. So there's some brilliant tools that are based in the Catapult here, or the Urban Innovation Centre, like Land Insight, Urban Intelligence, Commonplace are here today, got a fantastic digital tool. What we'd really like to aspire to have is a set of integrated digital tools so a citizen can be guided through the process really, really easily. What that relies on are open standards and the principles of kind of cooperation between digital tools. We've made a stab at creating an open framework for neighbourhood planning, which we'll publish online soon, and we'd invite lots of comments on what if that's going to work, what if that isn't going to work. But hopefully, for lazy citizens like myself that have grown used to being able to order a cab easily or order food easily, within a few years we can build a suite of digital tools that will enable people like me and others to get involved in the planning process. So thanks very much for your time, and if you do know anyone that would be interested in one of these reports, just £500, buy now. Cool.
Thanks very much, David. That's Uber for neighbourhood planning, right? Right, and up next, David Janet Klausner for Commonplace.
Arrow? There we go. Good, great. Hi, good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. My name is David Janner-Klaus, and I'm one of the co-founders of Commonplace. And I will also try to stick to 8 minutes. My first outing into working with people on plans was way back in the early days of the Docklands Development Corporation, and I was involved in creating something that was called the People's Plan for the Royal Docks. And the idea there was to present a bottom-up alternative to the proposal to build what became London City Airport. So that was a very manual process, but it was fascinating to interact with people and see what they knew about what was behind the dock walls, which could be used once shipping stopped coming in. So that's kind of where I started, and it's quite fun to find myself in a completely different universe a few decades later doing digital stuff. Commonplace is about getting more people involved, about building trust, and about transparency. As an organization, as a software provider, which is what we are, we're neutral. So people come to us with all sorts of points of views: developers, neighborhood plans, community groups, infrastructure providers, local authorities. And what we try to do is provide tools that are innovative, playful, and very simple to use. And essentially what we're trying to do is bridge a paradox. More and more people get their information and use services, as David said earlier, in ways that are digitally convenient. Now, lots of people don't, and we'll come to that in a minute. But those who do are getting used to increasingly narrow and functional apps, which enable you to do a certain activity with as little context as possible, as quickly as possible. That is exactly the opposite of building a built environment, which is complex, nuanced, and has lots and lots of layers of context. So what we're trying to do is breach this seeming paradox. And we're trying to do it in a framework which is sympathetic and understanding to the fact that the world is not entirely digital. So if we put a digital platform at the center and we connect it with social media, and that's important. Social media is great for this as a tool of dissemination, for letting people know that something is happening in their environment. It's absolute rubbish for getting any kind of systematic information about what they're thinking, because they go off on tangents and it's not necessarily informative, and you don't know who they are. So what we try to do is use social media to let people know that the platform exists, but drive them back into Commonplace in order to get their opinions. At the same time, what having a digital tool does for you in terms of decision-making processes is it provides data discipline. If you are asked to provide information in a logical sequence, that means that that can be analyzed simply later. Now, all of our platforms, this is an example of Lee Bridge Road, are open URLs. Anybody can see what the plans are. Anybody can see everybody else's comments. And these stay up after the consultation period is closed, which means that if you're looking at Lee Bridge Road in Waltham Forest, this is project stage is finished. There's a report about what happened. This stage finished nearly 2 years ago. Construction is almost finishing at Lee Bridge Road. In the interim, we also used Commonplace not only to get people's initial sentiment about what was wrong and what needed improving, but also to consult about plans and improvement, and you can do versioning and post different versions as well. So the idea here is that you're providing a provenance of a decision that people see on the ground. They can see the initial heat map, which tells you what people felt and thought needed improving. The second stage is what are the plans, and then, of course, things happen in the field. What's critical here is that the openness, the fact that all the comments are visible, negative or positive, builds trust. People trust the system if their negatives are expressed as well as positives. And not surprisingly, when you look at Commonplace heat maps, most of the dots are red or amber. In other words, people are not happy with what they've got there. And that's what you'd expect. We always ask a second question. So we ask people, how do you feel about this place? Then we say, why do you feel that way? Then we ask, how would you make it better? How would you improve it? So what we're trying to do is slow down the protest or the 4 minutes. Brilliant. What we're trying to do is slow down people's petition reaction. Oh, I don't like this. Let me sign a petition against it and walk away. What we're trying to do is say to people, right, let's start by saying, okay, how do you feel about this? Why do you feel that way? How would you improve it? Let us have your input. Now, when people want to add a comment to Commonplace, they need to create an account. When they create an account, we ask for some demographic information. That means that we can then help decision makers slice and dice the data. What are the top 5 things that are seen as key priorities for people who ride bicycles? What are the top 5 improvements that would help people who say they have young children? What are the things that would help people who say they suffer from a mobility impairment? So you can slice and dice the data, and that goes back to a point that Daisy made. This needs to be functional for decision making. Having a lot of information which you can't actually anchor in who the people are who are commenting is difficult, because you can't prove the provenance of that data. If you want to make difficult decisions and there are 50 people standing with placards outside the committee meeting, it's very useful to know that 1,500 people of a very diverse background have either commented online or you've recorded their demographics so you can bring that together with the online data. The other thing that's really important with online is that it's incredibly efficient. It's efficient because if you think of Catford, which I showed right at the beginning, let's go back there a sec. This is a consultation around future redevelopment of Catford Town Centre. At the moment, it's only been online. There's been no promotion face-to-face. There have been no workshop. Nothing has been done at all other than create a website and publicize it. All that will come later. But within 60 days of launching this, there were several thousand comments online, and we could tell our clients in Lewisham who has and hasn't participated online. That means that when you go to do the face-to-face work, you can target it to those communities, postcodes, age groups, demographics, groups who are less included at this point. It means that you're not duplicating effort. It also means that you're reaching a completely different demographic. The vast majority of the people who responded so far, not surprisingly, as all the dissemination was online, have been between the ages of 20 and 35. Very atypical of people who come to public meetings. So the converse of that is, it's a struggle to get younger people to public meetings. If you want them to join in the process, you've got to go to where they are. And if you want to get the overall demography, which also helps build trust in the process and enables decision makers to be bold, you need to ground that information as best you can. Digital offers you a way of doing that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Now, straight over to Niraj from Space Hive.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Are we afternoon? Yeah, afternoon, everybody. So I'm Niraj from Space Hive. I actually come here, as ever, wearing 2 hats. So Daisy mentioned it before, but not only do I work for Space Hive, but I'm also a local councillor in Harrow. And actually, with all of this focus on placemaking, but in particular the local authorities, I guess I have a completely different view to most people on all of this. I'll just tell you a bit about what Space Hive does, and maybe it might become apparent as to why I'm here. So we are a crowdfunding platform, but we're a crowdfunding platform for projects that improve local places. So what our platform allows you to do is post up an idea to improve your local area and then go off and raise the money that you need in order to deliver that idea. So at its simplest, it could be you want to renovate the local playground, or you want to put on a local festival, or you want to turn a railway line into a park. Our platform allows you to post that idea, set yourself a fundraising target, raise the money that you need, and then deliver that idea. Now, we started off at a central premise, which was people love the places that they live in and they have a connection to it. And we kind of thought that actually the places that they live in, they don't have much control over them. So all these decisions that are made in a place are being made at them and to them rather than with them and by them. And eventually this kind of spills out and you see petitions against things and protests against things. And I guess with my work as a counsellor, I see this all the time. And so we kind of thought that, all right, there must be a better way to deal with this. There must be a more positive outlet to give to people for that connection that they have of a sense of place. So I joined Space Hive at the very beginning. So I was the first employee 5 years ago. And so I've seen this kind of concept of what we call civic crowdfunding evolve from something that was just a theory and just a concept. Like, could you take the Kickstarter model of channeling funds into and startup capital into businesses and products and put it into the civic environment and therefore leverage creativity into the built environment? And that now turned into a reality where local authorities are using it across the country. The Mayor of London's using it internationally. It's being used by other cities. And you could ask, is this the future? Will people actually get to co-design their neighbourhoods by coming up with these ideas and posting them online and gathering support for what's happening? And I don't know is the answer to that. I think everyone looks at what we do and thinks, okay, is what you're doing all about money? Actually, it's not really about money. And what's happening is by people pledging to projects, hundreds and thousands of people, what they're really doing is voting with their wallets for change. And that's what makes these projects possible. Because 90% of the funding for our projects comes from people, but they only account, so 90% of the funders are people on our projects, but they only account for 10% of the money. So they're not actually funding these projects. The people who are funding these projects are the people who have always funded these projects, which are local authorities, grant bodies, property developers, housing associations, big corporates through CSR programs. They're still broadly and mainly the big funders of these projects. But what they're doing is they're reacting to the fact that people are voting with their wallets for change, and it's actually feeding into their decision-making process. So they're making better decisions about what projects should be supported locally. Now, what we found is that the involvement of these big institutions is very important, especially local authorities, because they hold the keys to all of this. And it comes back to what Daisy was saying at the beginning, which is this is about power. Now, they hold the power, and actually to get people interested in co-designing neighbourhoods, you have to give them a bit of power back. They won't just do it just off their own back. And so there's a bit of give and take here, because if you as an authority want people to be involved in shaping places, or if you as any organisation want people to be involved in shaping places, then you've got to give them actually quite a bit to get them involved in this process. And the reason is because there are too many systems in place that are bogged down in bureaucracy. So if I, as an ordinary person, want to change the area that I live in, I have to jump through so many hoops in order to do that. And I may not know this kind of in detail about all the hoops that I need to jump through, but actually the brand of the planning process and the planning system is so strong that I kind of know it without even knowing it. So I know that this is something so bureaucratic, dealing with people who completely don't get me, who have to tick all these boxes, that there's just no point in even doing it. And if you had a conversation with a normal person about this, that would be their reaction. They may not articulate it in those words, but that would be their general feeling, and generally they'd be right. So what can we do to change all of this? Well, I think first and foremost, local authorities need to get off their high horse and stop thinking that they themselves know everything about this. And it's the same with property developers. They look at an area and they think, okay, well, do you know what? I've got so much expertise in this, and I've been doing this for, thousands of years, that only I can make these decisions. And when I say I'm talking about an institution. This is evidently not true. And I think this is where the technology does come into it. That technology has empowered people and it's enabled people to get involved in decision making, fundamentally because it's giving them more knowledge and information. And so if you're thinking there as an institution, I think the first step is to get off your high horse. You don't know everything. And actually, it might be better for you if some decisions were taken that were out of your hands. But then I think your second responsibility here is to help in that process by getting as much information as you can out of your building and into the public, like assist in that empowerment process, give people the information that they need. But the problem with all of this is that, I always thought about this from a local authority perspective, but it's true of most big organizations, that you're used to giving out information in a certain way, and actually you're very good at giving out information that another local authority could understand or another property developer could understand. Are you that good in giving out information that people can understand? And the answer is probably not. So why do this yourself? Why don't you let other people do it? Why don't you let people who are better at actually taking that information and presenting it to people and give them the information that they can reproduce it in a more engaging way for individuals? And then the final bit of this is kind of making sure that you are giving away the sort of the permissions in a way that is easy for people to navigate. So at the moment, in order to get permission from a local authority, is too complicated, and people are then put off by it. And I would say the neighbourhood plans went again in that same direction. The whole thing is too cumbersome and complicated. Like what type of person would get involved in actually coming up with a plan, seeking that consensus, doing all the big cows that Andrew's talking about, running a referendum, getting all that support? Like who would do this kind of thing? And it's a very, very narrow audience. And so this limits you all the time. So you have, and when I say you, I'm talking about the people with the power, have a responsibility to, at a certain level, make it easy for people to get the permission that they need from you. So I think those are my takeaways from all of it. I won't go into too much of the detail of what we do, because I think you've heard from some great platforms out here already, but happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Niraj. I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions. If I can ask our panel to sit up in the front here, that'd be great. And we're going to go into questions. Is there lots of questions? Throw of hands to see how many questions, just to get an idea of how much time we have. Okay. Yeah, okay. If I can be a bit selfish and if I can kick off. I'm kind of struggling, as a planner, I'm struggling with the concept of citizen involvement today. We've been seeing some very bad decisions made by the public. Do I really want to transfer kind of decision making and about my neighborhood to citizens to the extent that you guys are suggesting?
I think in my view, it's again about that question. The yes/no question needs to be asked at the right time. And it requires that learning process to happen first. You make bad decisions if you ask the wrong question at the wrong time. Yeah.
Yes, I know you're saying that to wind us up anyway, but so obviously, yeah, this is going back to the point Angela made about asking good questions. If you ask people terrible questions and treat them like children, which something like Brexit did, or a very limited representative democracy does, then we, because we're all citizens, normal people as well, behave like children. But if you set up good decision-making processes where you respect people's intelligence and you ask good questions, then great stuff comes out of it. And that's not just from anecdotal experience, it's from academic studies that show the benefits of deliberative ways of working. Traditionally, the wider citizen hasn't been able to get involved because we haven't had the means. But throughout the 20th century, the means, whether that's good education or better information technologies or better communication technologies, has grown. And I have a bee in my bonnet about this at the moment because I sit around policy-making tables and I sit with people who are, I feel, out of touch just because they've been so successful and they no longer do the on-the-ground work. And the things they say about ordinary people in terms of these are complex decisions, they couldn't take them. And I sit there feeling, I don't see you taking any better decisions. Like, how extraordinary that you elevate your particular knowledge or experience above somebody who's got a completely different kind. And certainly, I've continued to work on the ground all the time, and I'm constantly amazed by the intelligence of the average person the minute you don't try and PR them or schmooze them into something happening in their area in a certain way.
Not a lot to add to that, except to say how on a digital platform you can ask good questions. And I mentioned earlier that part of what we try and do is slow down people's reflexes and introduce nuance. We've been doing a project with Levitt Bernstein, an architect's firm in Havant, in Hampshire. And it's a greenfield site the county council has identified for housing. And you'd expect that the initial reaction of people is, what do you mean you want to build housing where we've been walking our dogs for decades? Different dogs. And part of what we tried to do is, first of all, work with the architects who are doing face-to-face planning charrettes, launch a digital tool a few weeks before the first planning charrette, so you start getting a sense of what people are feeling. So the architects don't come in cold. But the other thing that we try to do is make it much harder just to say no. So you start by, it's almost like taking people through stages of bereavement. You start by acknowledging there will be loss. You then look at what it would be required for people to become more reconciled, to change. And subliminally, or not so subliminally, part of these processes are also about getting through the point which politicians are quite reticent to do, that unless there's change, there's no other way of resourcing essential public services. So there's a very acute political issue here as well. And you've got to use the way you ask questions to actually convey information about complex issues. So I completely endorse the point about asking questions, but beyond that, there's also an issue of how to use those questions to communicate really complicated notions.
I suppose unless you're anti-democratic, then the only way you can say that people make bad decisions is if you have a piece of information or experience or evidence even that's so powerful that you think it means that it's relevant or it's important to put it in front of people and say that they're about to make a really bad decision. Now, what our perspective would be that if you have that bit of evidence or information, then you need to give it to people all the time and in a format which means that they can understand it. And I'm sure a lot of citizens will recognize that they need to probably meet technocrats halfway and learn about statistics and skill up. But if you look at campaigns like Full Facts, or in America, PolitiFact, the open data movement in the UK, what all of these movements are trying to put across to government is that if they can see that there's a critical approach or piece of evidence that should dictate how we live our lives and should maximize quality of life for everyone, then you have to show it to people as best as possible, follow the scientific process, and then people should hopefully come on side. Now that's a bit of a kind of technocratic dream world that I probably live in, but I think there are some really strong engagements that we're getting at a much more kind of more almost academic level. So where technocrats and citizens on the ground are able to have a much more meaningful discussion because the information is freely available.
I kind of agree with Angela on this about it's all about the question. I mean, do people want to be making all the decisions about a neighborhood all the time? Probably not, because then you have this challenge of, oh, okay, I've got to become a semi-expert in this. Okay, do I have the time to become a semi-expert? Okay, you're always asking me all these questions. At some point, they're going to say, well, look, what are you there for? Well, aren't you there to make the decisions? I think that is the kind of the opposite end of the spectrum. And so you don't want to go too far there. So I think this is all about what questions are you asking them? What decisions do you want them to make? And I think a kind of an old school politician's answer to this will be, well, actually, the decision we ask you to make is who do you want to serve you? And we will represent you and make all your decisions on your behalf. I think that is now obsolete. And I don't think that is good enough to say that, well, you elected me 4 years ago, so I've gone and made every single decision for you that affects your life. I do not think that's good enough. But I think it is about finding what are the questions, what are the things that are most important to people. But then beyond that, forget about questions. How can we make a process that's fun, that can actually have people involved, that they can get something out of it themselves? Because I think if people are constantly answering questions and they don't see the change of that, and especially in planning, like the change is happening years and years and years and years, they'll just lose interest. But if you can give them something which actually their effort that they've put in results in something tangible semi-immediately, then they'll be more excited in getting involved. And I think the key is making that fun.
Good stuff. Thank you. Now, questions from the floor. I think we had one up front. Yeah? Yeah. We've got a...
In London, we have about 100 groups working on their own neighbourhood plan, and they obviously need to learn and do learn about local plan making and the London plan. And from my experience, you will find the biggest frustration for those who make the effort to learn about it. They realize that these planning policies in a London plan are more than once are not followed by the developers. They know this stuff so well that they can tell you, whatever you tell me about a neighbourhood plan, we have to be in compliance with the local plan and the London plan. The developers are not in compliance. So there's a weakness in the planning system that is very difficult to communicate. So if you learn for hours how this works, and then actually, the developers are not sticking to the rules either, or the local planning authorities or the planning committees. So there is an issue with incentivizing people to learn about something that is already irrelevant at the time when it comes to the planning decision.
Do you think digital can help?
I think with the transparency, digital tools can help to maybe communicate to those who make planning policies that their policies need to be much better, much stricter maybe, and if developers are not following those, or local planning authorities, that is known widely and shared widely, that these policies are not followed. Why are we bothering, really? So that's a communications tool. Yeah.
I agree. So this is the important thing. Who's taking the decision and how's it being taken? I'd certainly say at the level of project engagement, which is where I most often end up, so where somebody is now developing a site, I would insist every single time to whoever's producing those materials and whatever the work is, that those things are completely clear, so that we are communicating those things from the beginning, the decisions that have already been taken and at what tier they've been taken, and the decisions that are now open. Inevitably, there's frustration at that, because, as I say, people are intelligent. They do want to be involved in certain things. And more people in London are asking about those issues of bigger infrastructure, housing targets, density targets, what model of growth we've got. And at that stage, I think what you can do as part of consultation is make sure they're aware of the level to go back to, and even if they can't affect that project, to involve it. But I can see a big role for digital in terms of just being able, again, to provide information really clearly about the tiers at which decisions are officially being taken, so that people, for something they care about, can find where to impact that issue. And I would like to see the London plan being produced in a much more genuinely participative way, where it has changed a little bit. So Sadiq Khan has held these community forums at the start, but they have been official groups who are invited. The only way you can participate as a citizen is at online forums, which are really frustrating. So to actually see that regional policy built in a more participative way, and there could be a role for many of those tools in that, and then it will have a much more easy relationship with the policy that trickles down from it. And as you were saying, David, that I don't find that people actually behave like NIMBYs once they understand the pros and cons of the development in their area. People do start saying, well, if this is going to be genuinely affordable housing, yeah, okay, develop it. I live in a city, I'll walk my dog somewhere else. But they're never going to say that all the time. It's just a cloud of decisions that are apparently being taken by somebody else that doesn't take their view into account.
The only thing I'd emphasize is the language of plans needs to change. It's all very well to have fantastic interactive tools, but if we get a 500-page PDF to try and communicate through a website, it's still incredibly difficult. So it's partly systems, it's partly language, and I would urge planners to really think about communication when you start drawing the plans, mindful as I am that there are statutory things that need to be there, and that it will be the future for legal negotiations, and so it'll lay the foundations for future negotiations with developers and so on. Nevertheless, if you can possibly think of communications at the outset, that would help hugely.
Yeah, that's right. I suppose for the democratic process, we have sites like They Work For You, which are a brilliant way of understanding how your local representative has voted in the past. But as David says, planning data is much messier and more complex than voting data. So until we have decent standards in place in the planning system, it's going to be really hard to build digital tools that allow you to understand these different layers. So there's a lot of kind of boring, not very sexy work that needs to be done around language, around standards, making them open so that kind of sector of digital tools can then grow and start to meet user needs like the one you expressed.
The problem is these plans have no mandate. They don't have a real mandate. And that is why people, as in politicians, can just ignore them whenever they want to. Now, the technology is already there for these plans to have more of a mandate. But what they should be doing is just going out there and saying, people of London, what do you care about more? Do you care about keeping the skyline of London, or do you care about building out into the green belt of London? Which one are you going to prioritise? Or do you think that actually it's not a problem that there isn't enough housing in London, and we are quite happily not provide all the jobs that we need to within the city, and we'll look at other ways of doing it? Those are the types of things that you should be asking people. The tools already exist for that. You shouldn't be consulting on every like detailed bit of the plan, because when you do that, you're only going to get that narrow audience, and therefore you're not going to have your mandate for your plan. So I think actually politicians just need to get behind what's already there, use what's already there, and prioritize it. Because if Sadiq Khan put in like as much money as he puts in for all of his Facebook ad campaigns that he does on all the great things that he wants to talk about, and he put that much money into consulting on the London plan and just asked some simple questions and got the priorities of Londoners, then the plan would have more mandate, and then people would actually buy into it more.
Thank you, Neeraj. Green belt or skyline? That sounds like a referendum question. I'd be a bit worried, but we have to think about the question a bit more. Other questions from the floor? Anyone? Yeah.
I know that we are focusing on the citizen engagement part, but what are the skills and mindsets that are necessary on the other side? Let's say the authorities or the planners. What do they need in order to be able to listen openly to citizens?
So skills and tools from the local authority side. Who wants to start?
If you look at Planning magazine from a week ago, there's a little article I did exactly on that, on what digital skills planners need. I think one thing is to sort out communications. I come across local authorities where it takes 48 hours to get a tweet approved because comms need to see it. So, there's, and on the other hand, conversely, I was in Norwich, which I will happily name, who have made a conscious decision to give council Twitter accounts to frontline staff in order to enable them to interact. So that's just one example and a quick one.
Time is the big one, that for neighbour planning groups, they often find that if they have a relatively simple question from their perspective, that no one in the local authority has the time to be able to answer that question. Now, to some extent, citizen groups or digital tools can help to address that by bringing information that local authorities have to the citizen, so that citizen doesn't have to go through the local authority. So kind of civil society can take some of the already openly available data and serve it to the citizen. But for all the other stuff that's out there, they just need more time. And I'm not sure there's a quick fix to that necessarily.
What do local authorities need to know from citizens? Is that what you're asking? The skills and tools that a local authority needs to better make decisions. Oh God, I could go on about this all day. They need a they need a lot. Yeah, I think if I'm thinking about it from a planning perspective, they need to understand the knock-on effects of a building and of their decisions around planning, because we now reject flats that are going to be in that don't have enough car parking spaces. And the reason why we reject them is because the politicians, when we're knocking on doors, can see that people are complaining about too many people parking on their road, and they've got not enough car parking spaces. But actually, our planning officers, didn't care about this. They were just like, well, we need more housing, and so they prioritise that. Or they plant trees in front of people's houses, and they say, well, we need more trees. And then people come to us and say, well, look, the leaves are falling in my driveway, and the branches are here, and the birds are pooing all over my car. They don't understand these knock-on effects of the things that they're doing. So if we can somehow get the information to them and actually make them understand the feeling behind this. So how annoying is it that a bird is pooing on your car every day? Let's get that feeling across to people, so that when you're looking at planting a tree there, you're getting all that anger about bird poo, when you're making that decision about the tree. I think that's the kind of thing that we need.
I think to make better decisions, and also in terms of information sharing, I think every local authority should have a really decent 3D model and a political support for that, and have that as an open model so it can be changed. And that 3D model has a lot of spatial information attached to it. So again, information sharing, transparency, and the political will to actually do that. Which then, if you have the political will, the resources will flow. Without that, it won't happen.
Sorry, I've been thinking about this because I find it difficult because I do look at the local authorities I work with, and what I see are people on the whole going into these jobs with real will to do something for the public good. And actually the biggest barrier to them doing that tends to be the demand placed on their time, the amount of things they're expected to do and the stress that causes. So there's a misperception that they don't care or that they're lazy. And I never meet people like that. I meet people who are very caught up in things. But if I was going to shift one thing about mindset, and I do think that mindset often comes from people being in a kind of panic delivery mode, it's that I don't think a lot of the things that get produced by local authorities, whether it's from the comms department or from the people who are responsible for the direct engagement of citizens in planning, really think about the audience first. So I see a lot of things being done in very good intentions, but never starting with that very first question of who am I working with? What are their expectations in terms of language, time, priorities, questions? And quite often I come in to salvage things down the line, and I'll just ask really simple questions such as what came out as the priorities for local people, or how did they say they wanted to be worked with? And it's like, oh, because people are just rolling out these systems because that's the fastest way to do things. So that shift in mindset, but understanding it's incredibly hard in the context planners are expected to operate these days, under-resourced.
Good stuff, thank you. Now for the last question, Tony, make it a good one.
Yes, Tony Burton. Could I ask each member quickly to identify one thing which we can do with digital tools that we haven't been able to do before, as opposed to just trying to do the stuff that we're already doing using digital tools as well? What's disruptive? What's genuinely different about it?
When did you line up before? Is it like
Before digital tools? Yeah.
Niraj, I'll start with you.
Oh God, no, don't start with me. I think you can reach a wider audience without in a cheaper way. Like if you wanted to reach the whole borough of Harrow, if you were consulting on something in the past, you'd have to do events at every single town hall. You'd have to promote the events on every public asset that you had that the event was happening. Now you can just run a Facebook campaign, put in the geolocation, and then reach the whole of Harrow that way. And it's much cheaper and it's much more effective.
I suppose one of the things digital breaks is geography. So it breaks down the barrier between you and someone in Scotland communicating. Now, at the moment, that's kind of meaningless because it would take so long for you to chat to that person in Scotland to understand their context that then you could get something meaningful from that conversation. But what digital is starting to do, hopefully with our tool and with some other tools, is bring that context right to your doorstep so you can see what they're doing. And what you then perhaps might have is fewer discussions about whether we need to bring back regional planning and a few more discussions about how you can connect different small areas around the UK who are facing similar challenges to find solutions that work, run experiments as to whether those solutions worked across all of these areas that are similar, and then learn from that and evolve. So breaking down the different layers of planning and instead just having a sort of more network effect, I suppose.
What a great question. Thank you for that one, Tony. I'm glad I'm third. But I think if I were to say one thing, it would be transparency. And why do I know that that's new? Because when I talk to potential clients, it's the thing that scares them most.
The thing that really excites me is being able to have instant access to data, you're saying sliced in different ways. That data, though, I think we have to be thinking very carefully about the infrastructure of that data and who owns it. I don't want to be paying £500 as a local group in order to be able to get the data I need to do my plan. I think we have to look towards commons ownership models of data to manage concerns about privacy and capitalisation of assets. But why I love it is I love the idea that we could do proper... So these issues we've been talking about, how do you in a small amount of time get a group of people to use their natural intelligence to be able to think about the best way forward? I would love to see proper scenario planning being done with having data to hand that could be brought in to explore different scenarios with non-professionals. And on specific projects, I think back to when when they were deciding what's going to happen to Ground Zero, and the first set of top-down schemes were hated, they held the biggest charrette in the world in New York, and because they had this great on-site data collection system, they could have thousands of people in one room discussing things, sending in their thoughts, that data being processed immediately and shared, allowing another round of deliberative decision-making. So it's that stuff, like having information transparently to hand to enable citizens to work together to think about the future that I do get excited about. Not a total Luddite.
I think it's a very good question. I don't really have a proper answer for it yet, but I think sort of responding to it quickly, I think it's the numbers game. It's the fact that digital engagement and digital tools allow you to amplify good work that's been done by a smaller group and really getting it out and getting an answer, which then allows that decision-making to have that information. So that amplifying effect that digital can have, because it's cheap to amplify.
Good, excellent. Well, we're kind of coming up to time. I want to thank the panel. I think for me, as a bit of a technology fetishist coming from the Future City Sketchbook, one thing I think I've learned technology can't do is work out what questions to ask. It can help us do things very fast. It can help us provide certainty and transparency, but it can't work out the questions, which kind of, in a way, kind of resonates with Cedric Price's quote: "Technology is the answer, but what is the question?" And I think that's something that I think we'll kind of struggle with in the next 10, 20, 25, 30 years as we plan cities. So just a big round of applause to our panel. Thanks very much. And thank you all for coming today. Tomorrow we're going to have a similar lunchtime session discussing design. On Wednesday we're going to be talking about viability. And Thursday we'll be launching our PlanTech exhibition upstairs. So yeah, please do keep in touch. Thank you.